As we continue our theme on black and white, what is it that we can know from nature? Let's turn to Romans chapter 1. We're going to read our text again. Romans chapter 1, verse 19 through 25. Romans 1, 19 through 25. We mentioned last week, just to review from what we talked about last week, we talked about how from verse 20 we see that there are two different categories of what nature tells us about God. There are three things listed in this verse. Last week we talked about his power and his deity. That is his impersonal characteristics. There also mentions that nature can prove the invisible attributes of God, the things we can't see. And we see this formula a couple times in the scriptures. We also see it in Hebrews 11 in verse 6, where it tells us that those who come to God must believe that he exists, that's impersonal, and that he is a rewarder, that is a personal characteristic. So nature, God says that nature can prove his impersonal and at least some of his personal characteristics. Last week we talked about logic, and we talked about science, and we talked about nature, and how there's only one logical conclusion, and that is that this universe requires a creator, and it requires a powerful creator. We saw some of the forces of nature, and how incredible, really, when we think about it, the power of God is, and that there's no logical explanation other than a creator. Paul also knows, and he tells us that nature proves his invisible attributes, and we're going to look at some of those today. Now, obviously, there's a limit to what nature can tell us about God. That's why we have a Bible to describe God to us, because we can only know some general things about God from nature. So we don't want to try to say that we can prove the Trinity, for example, from nature. We can't prove that there's nothing in nature that would show us. If you're trying to prove too much, it's going to be obvious. Whose idea of God is right? This is one that is a common question. And once we've determined the existence of God, then we have to consider whose God is correct. And as we said last week, and I want to mention this again, that the Bible cannot prove things about God. Right? I believe in the Bible, and the Bible is a valuable resource. But to say that it proves God is a bit of circular reasoning, which is one of the things that we argue against those who believe in evolution, who are atheistic. They use circular reasoning oftentimes. The Bible, to believe the Bible, you have to first assume the existence of God. And so that's why Paul says that nature proves it. Before there was a scripture, he says that things were written inside of them. We're going to see that today. We're going to see that things are written inside of us that we can't escape from. We are going to use the scriptures, but only to show that the Bible makes some assertions about who God is. And we're going to look at some of those that we can confirm from nature. And the first one of these is that God is one. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 20. Galatians 3:20. It says, now God is one. This is a theme that's mentioned throughout the scriptures, that God is one. Now this word does not, it can mean one singular, like there's only one God, there's one book on the table. It can also mean unified, completely one. Right? That's more the concept that we look at in the Bible, that God is unified, completely unified, that there are different individuals, and this is one of the things that we cannot prove. We just have to take this on faith, that there are individuals that compose our one God, our unified God. And that is going to differ from polytheism because they are connected in a way that's unexplainable. There's some things that we just can't explain. We have to take them on faith. But we want to look at monotheism versus polytheism. Many gods, one God. And in times past, and this is not a new thing, and in fact this goes back to early Christianity, different writers throughout history have tried to show that polytheism came first and that monotheism was a departure from that. It was an evolutionary process. At first, everyone believed in polytheism. And simply, the more that we have dug into the ground, the more that we have looked at information that's available, the more science improves, the more information is available about our past as humans. And as we discover more information, this view is being abandoned by at least reputable people. There are many atheists, Sir Flinders Petrie, who you may or may not have heard of, but he's the one who really did the groundbreaking work into the pyramids. He's an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and even he says, no, as we look at our past, there's the view that polytheism was at the beginning, it cannot be defended. Every ancient society, when we look at throughout the world, ancient peoples, all show archaeological proof that we dig up that evolution, or that the evolution of their religion was it began from monotheism, one God. Whatever they called that God, whether it was they worshipped the sun, it was the sun only. And then many gods were added. This is true of Chinese people, Aborigines, American Indians, even in Africa, in every continent that you go where there's ancient people, the original belief was in one God. But you've probably not heard that. There are still people that hold on to that hope to try to disprove Christianity, that originally there was polytheism. In fact, even civilizations that are known for their polytheism, like India and Greece and Egypt, we know these as polytheistic peoples. But at the very beginning, they actually believed in one God. It's very interesting. We could go further into this and even show that almost every ancient people have a garden story with the fall of man, a creation of some sort, and the fall of man and being chased out of a garden, some type of version of that, and also have a flood story. It is very interesting that what we read in the Bible is again and again proven by archaeology. But no, we're not here to talk about archaeology. We're here to talk about nature and what it proves to us. Part of nature is information. And simply put, polytheism is not logical based on what we know about our universe. What all polytheistic religions have in common? Well, they all show war and competition between their deities. I worked for a friend of mine, and he had a business with another partner, and they were, or attempted to be, pretty close to equal partners. And so I would be on a job, and I'm just the worker. And so one of my bosses, Tony, would come in and he would say, oh, you need to do this. Okay, Tony's the boss. So I'm not going to say what I should or shouldn't do. He's my boss. So I would go and do what he would do. And then Kurt would come in later. Tony was off doing something. What are you doing? You need to be doing this. So Kurt's the boss. So I would then go and do what Kurt wanted me to do. And at the end of the day, what do you think was the result? The result was that there were several things that were done, but it looked like they were done with two different principles. Because no two people can be completely unified, even as much as they try. Even in a marriage, there's no two people that have ever gotten married that were completely unified on every thought was the same. This is why God is one, and this is why it's so beyond our comprehension. But polytheism shows always this concept, war between gods. They also show corruption, whether you read in Egypt or whether you read in Greece, or their mythology, or whether you read in the Vedas about India's gods. They show sexual perversions of all kinds. They show betrayal. They show murder. Every vice. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe man just wants a God that's no bigger than himself. Maybe man wants a God that's no better than himself. Because I feel better if my God has the same problems I do. If the God I worship is no better than me, then he really can't tell me what to do. So it's okay. I can satisfy my desire to worship something. We talked about that last week. That every man, every person, every nation in the history of the world has wanted to worship. We can't get away from the things that are written on our hearts. And so to satisfy that need, but to make it so that I don't feel like I have to do something, I pick a God that's as bad as me. I make a God who does disgusting things. That's what people do naturally. That's the evolution from a great God, a unified God, down to polytheism. See, that's the way it really works. But if this polytheism were true, then what would we see in the universe? And I always like to illustrate this with gravity, because gravity is a scientific law that we all can see. Well, we can't see it, but we see the effects of it, we feel the effects of it, and it's pretty easy to understand. What if there were different bosses in this universe, different gods? And this God over here made this part of the universe, but there's equal gods everywhere. And so this God makes this. Well, it would be like working for Kurt and Tony again, where you and I are used to gravity pulling us towards objects. But what if we went to a different part of the universe, where a different God thought differently, and he thought gravity should pull you sideways? Or then you went to a different part of the universe, you got sucked into a wormhole, and you went to a different part of the universe, and gravity pulled you up. And then you went to a different place, and that God just doesn't like gravity at all. This is what we would see in our universe. Not just with gravity, but with every law of physics that exists. Because somewhere there would be a God who thought differently, just like people. Science shows a universe of continuity. It does not change from one end of the universe to another. It shows the print of one God. We can know this from nature. We can look at so many things just on our planet. Here's a slide. What is this? Okay, we've seen this every day. Probably if you haven't seen it, it's just because you haven't paid attention, at least in the summertime. But a bee pollinating a flower. A bee pollinating flower, what's significant about that? What does that show us about one God? Well, what it shows us is that nature functions in unity. Not just, remember, we're not talking about a singular God, but one that functions in unity. That the principles of this earth cannot be broken down into its separate parts and completely isolated. This plant needs this bee. But this bee needs this plant. And you know who else needs both the bee and the plant? Is you and I. They cannot exist apart from each other. If we removed all the bees from this world right now, we would be having a fun time looking for food next year. Almost every flowering plant on this planet, that's most of your vegetables, almost all of your vegetables, almost all of your fruits, your trees, almost all of your flowering plants on this earth require a bee for pollination. So without the bee, you and I do not live. Okay? What does that show us? God gives his fingerprint of unity, that he functions himself in unity, and that everything that comes from him goes according to a master plan that requires the parts to work together. We could look at so many cycles, so many things that require one to function with another, or else they both cease to exist. And we ask the atheist, how in the world, no pun intended, could this have come from an accident? How can you have this without this, but how can you have that without that? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And God is one, and nature demands it to be so. The second point, if we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 4. Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. The Bible declares that God is just. Just and right. These are words: justice, fairness. All these words really come from the same idea. When we look at the concept of law, justice, it requires truth. Justice is truth. The concept of law is one that demands the existence of God. Not just his existence, but it shows us what his character is. He is not a god like those Greek gods, like those Egyptian gods, like those Indian gods, one of vice and one of disgusting sinfulness. He is a God of justice and righteousness. You see, we all want what is fair. As we go back to Romans, he says he's written it on our hearts. We can't escape from it. We're going to see that just a second. But the concept of truth, we talked about how it's information. Where does information come from? Where is the dwelling place of information? Information dwells in a mind. It requires a mind. Information without a mind is a fish without water. He naturally resides there. The fish doesn't exist without the water, and information does not exist without a mind. And so there must be a mind for information to come from. We talked about that last week. That is God. But not just neutral information, but moral information. Truth. You cannot have a concept of truth unless it has been given to you. In the Serengeti, in the jungles, you see these nice documentaries of nature. And I have yet to see this documentary where the gazelles stand up and they say, listen, there's thousands of us, and there's only a couple dozen of those lions that live around here. We're taking a vote. We're taking a vote, and because there's more of us, we've outvoted the lions, and lions can no longer eat gazelles. We've determined this, and the lions say, well, I guess you've outvoted us, so we're going to have to go start, eating bushes, I guess. I don't know what we're going to eat because we got outvoted. Moral law does not exist in their world. It's not been given to them. They don't have discussions of morality because it does not reside in their world. Now, there's lots of arguments against the concept of law. The concept of law demands a lawgiver. But people don't want a law because they want to be free to do what they've said, as we've pointed out already. And so they say, well, morality is really subjective. Judges 17:6 describes this, where it says that there were no kings, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. What's right in my eyes? This has a lot of different descriptions. We can call this subjective morality or situation ethics. But basically, there is no black and white. Right or wrong. How is right or wrong determined? Well, it's determined by the result. And so, in some situations, a lie is okay. If it benefits the one who's lying, of course. Although sometimes someone will really have a moral dilemma about maybe it's better in this case to lie to this person because it will help that person. They don't want to know the truth, so it's better just to lie to them. Lots of different dilemmas that people like to pose, which are really designed to try to bypass the difficult decision of morality. Another argument against black and white morality is they say, well, see, morality really evolved. Morality is whatever a society determines. And so different peoples have different priorities based on their culture. And so we see different moralities in different countries. And so they will say, since there are no two people, no two nations that can agree universally on what moral law is, that really proves that it doesn't exist at all. And we'll deal with that in just a second. The third one is kind of like the first one. We call this individual morality. And that is that we each determine what is right for us. You don't have a right to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong. Well, let's answer these arguments. First of all, subjective morality is no morality at all. How do you determine what is right? For example, if the result is good for you but bad for me, we have a problem. We have competing results. Well, it's going to be whoever's will is stronger, is really what it is. Whoever's powerful is right. My morality is better than your morality because I'm stronger and I can enforce it on your will. And we've become like the lions and the gazelles, existing without morality in our world at all. See, subjective morality is not morality. The very fact that a person would have to weigh the results shows that there's a concept in his heart of morality, that he's weighing whether he should or shouldn't do this. The very fact that we would have the discussion of morality shows us that morality exists, and if it exists, then there must be an absolute of it somewhere. There must be absolute math, right? There are absolute principles of math. If there was subjective math, then there would be no math at all. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5 in certain situations. Okay? It always equals 4. It's an absolute. If you're having the discussion of math, it means that math exists. And if there was subjective math, then there would be no math at all, and we wouldn't even talk about it, because it wouldn't exist. And the same is true with morality. Since we talk about it and argue about it, that means it exists. As to societal evolution, we should notice that societal evolution is always negative. It is never positive. Now, people can get better, but they do not get better by way of evolution. Look at our text in Romans chapter 1, and we see that man began with an idea of God, and what happened? he started worshiping polytheism. And in that, he became worse, because he no longer held the ideals that he held at the beginning. This is evidence in politics. I know this from American politics, probably true here. What happened to America? It started with this ideal based on the Bible, or principles of the Bible. It began with people who sought the freedom to exercise their religion. It started with people with a concept of morality at the center. Now, we can argue whether they were correct in everything or not, but they had an idea. And what has happened today? What do we see? Do we see improvement from that ideal? Do we see that they fixed their errors where they might have been wrong or whatever, where they could have had an improvement? Do we see that those things have been fixed and it's better now? No. We see the opposite, because society never evolves up. It can change up, but it always takes a dramatic force to do it, never evolution. Society does not evolve better. Think about your elections. Every cycle of elections, those who seek morality are less and less happy with the choice we face before them. And what do we say? I've got to vote for the lesser of two evils. So we establish a standard here. Here's our standard. We're voting for the better of these two guys right here. So what will happen in the next cycle? Well, both of those guys that are in the next cycle will approach that line, but they will never be better. They won't. Very rarely will you be more happy with your choice of two people than you were the last time. Every time I'm like, this is the time, this is the election where I will like my choice more than last time. And it never fails. I'm less enthused every time. Because man evolves downward. That's who we are. We can change better, but it takes a dramatic force. And, by the way, where did society, if it is a process of evolution, where did society get the idea in the first place that it should have a system of morality? It has to come from somewhere. Think about it. I've been blind my whole life, okay? We can do this experiment pretty quick. I've been blind my whole life. Andre, could you please explain to me the color blue? You can say the sky's blue, but I've never seen the sky. You say, well, water's blue. I've never really seen the water. You see, it doesn't exist in my world, and so I cannot have a concept of it. And so for society even to discuss whether this is morality or that's morality requires its existence. And the third argument against is that individual morality is founded on rights. See, oh, individual morality, you don't have the right to tell me what to do. Listen to that statement very closely. You do not have the right to tell me what to do. Let me turn that back around on you. Why do you have the right to tell me that I don't have the right to tell you what to do? See, you assume that you have certain rights. You can't get away from the principle written on your heart. And that is a principle of rights. It's a principle of justice. It's written on our hearts. And no matter how much a person wants to run from it, the strongest atheist in the world has a principle written on his heart. It is burned into his heart, and he can't run away from it. It's a part of him. And it proves God's existence. It proves that God is a just God because he has created justice. My rights. Why do you feel you have the right to do what you want? Why do you feel that if I take your money that you have been inconvenienced? That something wrong has been done with you and you're going to take me to court? Why is that there? The gazelles run because that's a part of life. They accept, whether they like it or not, they accept the supremacy of the lion as a natural order of things. Justice is not in their concept. It doesn't exist for them because it's been given by a mind to us. If I point a gun at your head, you instantly believe in black and white. This is wrong. See, everyone wants there to be no absolutes until it affects them. But when it affects them, they accept the concept of morality, of law, of justice. These two things, all we're talking about today, we got a couple more next week. These two attributes of God, that God is one and that God is just, that He functions in unity, that He functions in righteousness and truth. These are evidenced from nature. And as we said, man cannot get better on his own. Man cannot evolve better, but we can become better. Because we have a force that is stronger than nature. Nature is what makes us become worse, our human nature. But it requires a supernatural force to propel humans to a higher standard. The force that can create nature, can manipulate it. Just like we talked about Christ with miracles last week. Why is it not amazing that Christ can do miracles? It shouldn't be amazing that He can do miracles, because He created science. He can manipulate its laws. God created me. He can manipulate my nature. He can make me better. I cannot do it on my own. No person, no society has ever shown the ability to consistently get better through its own natural processes. It requires the intervention of God.